Communications Committee for your dedication to producing what I'm sure promises to be another wonderful talk, to the bookstore for your co-sponsorship of our programs, and I hope that all of you will consider becoming members of our Library Supporters Program. It's through your support that we're able to host programs such as the one today. We're also filming today's program, and so our esteemed speaker will be, there'll be a link from the university's YouTube channel and iTunes University channels. We also appreciate your feedback, which helps to inform our programming. So please take a few moments and fill out your comment card and hand it to one of our library staff members at the end of the program. The Libraries Meet the Author series encourages dialogue on significant contemporary issues and brings together faculty, students, and staff to debate and discuss these issues. This is an exciting year for the university as we celebrate 100 years of co-op. Today we welcome Christos Papadimitriou. Christos was born and grew up in Greece. He studied electrical engineering at the National Technical University in Athens and then was awarded a PhD in computer science from Princeton. After teaching at Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, Christos now holds the Lester C. Hogan Chair at the University of California at Berkeley. His research work is in the theory of algorithms, computational complexity, and game theory, fields in which he is one of the leading international experts. He has published over 300 original articles in leading scientific journals, which have received to date over 25,000 citations. You can check that in Web of Science. His books, Elements of the Theory of Computation, Computational Complexity, and Combinatorial Optimization, Algorithms and Complexity, are the standard textbooks in their fields. While his first novel, Turing, was published in 2003 by MIT Press. Christos is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering of the United States, and has been awarded numerous honorary doctorates and other distinctions, among them the prestigious Charles Babbage Prize. Perhaps most importantly, Christos also plays in a keyboard. He rocks out in a rock band. Please join me in welcoming Christos. You're welcome.
It's wonderful to be here. Many thanks to the library and the bookstore for having me here. Okay. Right, so I'm going to start by pondering this question. You know, what are the intellectual roots of computers and the internet? And I guess the broader overarching questions are questions like this ever meaningful? Okay, so but let's try to see. I mean, I thought hard about it, and here's what I think: that there are three sort of intellectual undercurrents that are clear antecedents of what I say, the computers and the internet. And the first one is rather obvious, calculation. The second one is artificial intelligence. I'll tell you what I mean. And the third one is logic. Okay, logic in a more sophisticated sense. Of course, I mean, computers, they have logic. There is something called the arithmetic logic unit in every computer. But that's not what I mean, okay? That's a rather sort of superficial connection, but obvious connection. But there is something deeper going on here, and that's the story actually I want to tell. So, starting with calculation, briefly, calculation always was extremely important, very central. It was, in some sense, the limiting constraint on every society, every civilization, because you need the calculation for essentially everything in organized society, from building to navigation to land allocation to land distribution to taxation to everything, okay, to inventory, war. So the problem is that even some of the most sophisticated civilizations of antiquity did not have means to do calculation. For example, for example, how do you add numbers like that? Okay, it's painful even to think about multiplying them. All right, so that was a problem, and the greatest advance in calculation in the history of civilization was by far not the computer. Okay, it was these methods that today we learn in elementary school, so it's easy to underestimate their importance for adding, multiplying, dividing, and so on numbers. And these methods were, if not invented, certainly popularized by this man, Al-Khwarizmi. You know, the word algorithm comes from his name. This man worked in Baghdad. He wrote in Persian, and probably came from Uzbekistan. So he's national hero in 3 countries. Okay, so it is through his books that Europeans learned about the decimal representation and the algorithms, the methods calculating methods that come with it, and that was an incredible breakthrough. It completely changed the world. It meant democratization of everybody. It's not just abacus experts and geniuses who could add numbers beyond their fingers. Okay, it was now everybody could. Okay, so both architects and builders, both generals and soldiers. So to my mind, it's comparable. Its effect on human culture is comparable to that of typography. Okay, and I believe that without these calculating methods, Galileo, Copernicus, even Newton would be dead in the water. Okay, so it was these methods that really propelled science and technology, and the computer was a rather consequential corollary of all this. Okay, so calculation, very, very important. So in some sense, our civilization is the first civilization that is very much aware of how limiting calculation is to us. Okay, so how important calculation is, but it was forever. Artificial intelligence, here what I mean is the dream of the intelligent machine. So it's amazing that there is probably no civilization where there is no creation myth in which somebody creates something that is intelligent and lives. Okay, so for example, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is probably in this tradition, and this is very universal, and it's near theological. This sort of urge to think about building intelligent things, and this is here is a ancient Greek invention by Hero of Alexandria of a pneumatic device to open mysteriously, magically, the gates of the temple at the precise moment of the sacrifice. Then there is the Golem of Prague. I have the mechanical Turk. I don't know if you are familiar. So it was a phony device for playing chess. And on the right, I have I don't know how many of especially the young people have seen this wonderful film, 2001, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey. To me, the most sympathetic protagonist was a homicidal computer whose name was HAL, and picture there on the right, in some sense, this brings to another point, that the dream of the intelligent machine, most often in popular culture, becomes the nightmare of the intelligent machine. Okay, so it's very hard to give popular lectures about computers without confronting the question, but professor, aren't you paralyzed of fear that one day you are going to be ruled by machines? Okay, so frankly, I think that this is the most effective answer for this. Okay, and it's okay. All right. So going on, the third leg on which the prehistory of computation lies is what I call logic. Logic, as we know, was essentially invented in the 4th century BC by Aristotle, who invented syllogisms, and it was perfected by a rather unknown Phoenician, Hellenized Phoenician called Chrysippus in the 3rd century. He was the first who came up with sort of like a bull BC. He invented what we call today logical connectives of and, or, not, and so on. So Then nothing much happened in logic for a very long time. Okay, yeah. Almost more than 2,000 years. Okay, so no, almost 2,000 years. So until in the turn of the 18th century, Leibniz was a great German philosopher, mathematician, scientist, was the man who brought us actually calculus and optimism, okay, two great inventions, right? So, so Leibniz wanted to carry out Aristotle's project to the extreme. His dream was that he's going to build a rationalizing engine, sort of a calculus rationator, he called it, whose function would be the following. Whenever we want to make an important decision about war and peace, about investment and so on, we would gather all facts and then we'll sit around the table and say, calculemus, let us calculate, okay? And magically the decision would arrive at the optimum decision, okay? So that was his dream, and of course he needed logic for that, but he was a very busy man, he didn't actually get to it. Almost 100 years later, it was George Boole, an Englishman teaching in Ireland, who wrote The Laws of Thought, in which what we now know as Boolean logic and Boolean algebra was invented. So this is, in some sense, the first period of logic. You know, both with the ancients and with Leibniz and Boole, logic, the intended use of logic, was in the case of Aristotle, as a practical tool of analyzing reasoning in empirical science. Okay, so you know, how do scientists think about sort of in botany, for example? I mean, that was Aristotle's. That's why he called it. That's how his books on logic are called the tool, the organon. Okay, and Boole and Leibniz, they considered it basically as a tool for in decision making, as you would call it today. But logic was about to achieve a much more important status with the next stage, where logic was used for resolving the crisis in mathematics. Okay, there was a crisis in mathematics the second half of the 19th century. Now, for many of you, sort of, you know, the crisis in mathematics may sound like an oxymoron, okay, because mathematics may be either fun or impenetrable, but certainly it sounds very stable, very robust, and eternal, okay? So how can there be a crisis in mathematics? But it's true that in the 19th century, the edifice of mathematics, on which the whole of science, and therefore the whole of world after the Renaissance was counting on, they received some deadly jolts. The first one was that in the beginning of the 19th century, mathematicians discovered that what every educated person back then knew as the absolute truth, which was Euclid's theorems, okay, that they were iffy, that it was relative, you know. So do Euclid's axioms hold, theorems hold? Well, it depends whose axioms you believe in. Okay, so this was a complete shock for everybody. I mean, great thinkers like Kant could not comprehend it. Okay, so and sort of wrote against it. And then to compound on this problem, there was this man came, Georg Cantor, who was decided to play with infinity. Okay. Infinity was used by mathematicians very wisely, in some sense, until then, as something that you hold with a long stick, okay, and you never quite touch, okay. But you know, actually, Gauss had explicitly forbidden. Gauss was the greatest mathematician of the 19th, around 1800. Explicitly forbidden mathematicians to deal with infinity, but Cantor disobeyed, and he proved very interesting, very deep theorems about infinity. For example, he proved that there are many kinds of infinity. There is vanilla infinity, and then there is different infinity, more power infinity, and a tower of more powerful infinities. Okay, this came as complete shock to everybody. Okay, because now the foundations of mathematics were in deep trouble, okay? And then mathematics, which was up to that point very extroverted because it was sort of, in some sense, it was instrumenting all of the sciences. It became introverted. It said, let's set our house in order, okay? And the first person who actually did that is this man, Gottlob Frege, who the first thing he did is, that's what he's famous for. He extended Boole's and Boole's logic in a way, sort of, you know, for those of you who are familiar with this, he invented quantifiers. In a direction which will make it useful, not for decision making, but for curing the problem, the crisis in mathematics. Okay, so and then he used this tool to write a 1,200-page, two-volume opus on founding arithmetic on this edifice, on logic. Okay, and what happened next, I guess, is that Bertrand Russell came up with his paradox. Okay, so let me so the best way to tell you about this paragraph is to read this poem. It's my translation, and it's the poet is Zissimos Lorenzatos. He's a Greek poet. He died a few years back in my town, the town where when I stay when I'm in Greece, Kifisia. So he's a great poet and essayist. I mean, in a parallel universe, he could be the best poet of a nice country, but he had the bad luck to be born Greek. And it may sound chauvinistic what I say, but the fact is that there were an incredible number of great Greek poets during the 20th century. Okay, so maybe he made top 10, maybe not. Okay, so but he wrote this nice poem about the incident I'm describing to you now, which I'll read to you in case you cannot, from the back. Beware of systems grandiose, of mathematically strict causalities, as you are trying, stone by stone, to found the gold-woven tower of the logical, castle and fort immune to contradiction, because that's exactly what these people were trying to do, these and the next few heroes that I'm going to present. Designed in 2 volumes, the foundational laws of arithmetic, or Grundgesetze der Arithmetik, in 1893 the first, 1903 the second, a life's work, hammer on chisel blows for years and years. So far, so good. But as Frege Gottlob was correcting, content, the printer's proofs already of the second volume, one cursed logical paradox, one not admitting refutation, questioned by Russell, Bertrand, forced without delay the great thinker of Mecklenburg to add a last paragraph to his system. Show me a great thinker who would resist the truth. Accepting the irreversible disaster, his foundations in ruin, his logic flawed, his work wasted, and his 2 volumes, imagine the colossal setback. Add odd load and ballast for the refuge guard. So that's exactly what happened. Frege had the amazing magnanimity to admit it on the spot. Bertrand Russell was not content to pointing out the paradox, but he went on a crusade to fix it, okay? And in order to fix it, he wrote to this man. He embarked on a project with his old professor at Cambridge, Alfred Whitehead, to write the Principia Mathematica, which would finally do what Gottlob failed to do because of his incomplete understanding of set theory and Russell's paradox. And so they tried and tried, and their work lasted for 10, 11 years, and they had 3 volumes this time. And there are no fatal flaws in these volumes that I am aware of, but the fact is that they did not achieve what they were set out to do. Okay, in other words, they did not manage to found all of mathematics on a secure basis as they had planned and hoped. Then, okay, Russell. When I describe Russell, I usually say that he's perhaps the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, and the perhaps is due to this man, okay, who is Russell's most distinguished student, but also Russell's nemesis. Ludwig Wittgenstein. These are all sketches from Logicomix, by the way. So, who was an ingenious Austrian philosopher who, what should I say about him? So, you know, he's bigger, much stranger than life. So, he, for example, he wrote, you know, the greatest book, the most discussed, you know, philosophical book of the 20th century is a little treatise, a few dozen pages written by Wittgenstein. It's called Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The point is that he wrote it while risking his life during the First World War by volunteering for every life-threatening mission. And he finished it in an Italian prison camp. You know, the Italians saved his life by capturing him. Okay, so incidentally, his three brothers committed suicide, and his fourth brother was a famous, you know. I think if I had invented this character, I would be booed by every critic. Okay, you know, because so and his fourth brother was a world famous concert pianist who during the First World War lost his right arm. Okay, so so if you have heard the concerto for left hand by Ravel wrote it for Wittgenstein's brother. Okay, so he did it. So that's Wittgenstein. The intellectual leader of the mathematical army that was trying to to repair the foundation of mathematics was this man, the greatest mathematician of his time, David Hilbert. He was not only the leader, he was also the cheerleader with his war cry, "We must know, we shall know." And so under this cry, the mathematicians of all stripes and nationalities during the First World War, through the interbellum, sought to put order to the foundation of mathematics until the fateful year of 1931. This man, Kurt Gödel, then in his late 20s, young, recent PhD at the University of Vienna, came up with what I consider the greatest theorem of the 20th century, which is in some sense, a theorem to end all theorems. It's you know, but not quite. It is a theorem that says essentially the following: that no matter how smart one, no matter how many volumes Russell and Whitehead add to their Principia Mathematica, no matter how sophisticated our systems and methodologies become, there will always be mathematical truths which cannot be proven. Okay, theorems that are true but unprovable. All right, so that mathematics will always be incomplete. This came as a complete shock to mathematicians, okay, because they all soldiered under, even Gödel. I mean, that's something that is not very widely known, but he did not, he discovered this not by trying to contradict Hilbert. He discovered this while soldiering in the completeness camp, okay, but in a sort of in a twisted way that would be too technical to describe now. So everybody had believed in Hilbert's dream, that there are no unsolvable problems. We'll have, in some sense, this is a theorem that captures the 20th century, okay? Because in some sense, there was scientific cynicism already through the randomness in quantum mechanics, through the Heisenberg's uncertainty and all that, okay? But this, I think, okay, we excuse little flaws in the world, okay, but in mathematics, okay, that's something that nobody expected. That mathematics, in some sense, the world intellectually entered middle age, after that, okay, in some sense, the extreme optimism of youth, the dream of omnipotence was defeated. Okay, and so this is in some sense the darkest story, or the darkest moment of the story of logic, except that it's also the beginning of the upswing of the amazing unintended consequence of this story, which is that 5 years after Gödel, this man, then in his early 20s, graduate student at Cambridge University, wanted, what Turing tried to do was he tried to sharpen even further the negative message of Gödel, and essentially to establish that not only there are theorems that you cannot prove, but even those theorems that have proofs, even those theorems, these proofs cannot be automated, okay, cannot be produced by a machine. But then a funny thing happened, that in order to make the result, to prove this even more disappointing result, he had to define what a machine is, okay, because to prove that there is no machine, okay, you have to say, okay, but what is a machine? And his definition was one of the most happiest moments of the 20th century. I mean, he defined the machine in such a way that had sort of, the gift of universality. By universality, it's sort of, it sounds like a big word, but in practice it means software. It means that you don't need to have a different computer for solving problems, for building bridges, or for designing bridges, a different computer for calculating orbits, a different computer for sending email, and a different computer for balancing your checkbook. You need only one computer, and software will do the rest, okay? The polymorphism will be achieved through software. So this fundamental idea was first pushed by Turing, and in fact it was not at all self-evident. Actually, the greatest, the greatest majority of the establishment thinking about machines at that time were thinking in terms of very specialized calculators. Okay, so universality is important. In fact, when in the beginning I say what are the origins of the computer and the internet, I mean it very really. Okay, because this idea of universality, in my opinion, is the origin of the internet. Let me explain to you why. Because I don't know if you know that, but when the television was invented in 1900, okay? There was an exhibition of a television set, not very much unlike what we have, what we had until a couple of decades ago. In the 1900 World Trade Fair in Paris, okay? So that was, it was there, okay? But for 4 or 5 decades, nobody owned a television set. And the reason that nobody owned a television set, there was nothing to see, okay? But of course, the reason why there was nothing to see, it was because nobody had a television set. So you can't afford to produce content for nobody. So these trivial chicken and egg problems, took 5 decades to resolve. You see what I'm saying? So compare this with the internet, okay? When in 1992, when the internet came about, there were 20 million computers, personal computers in the desks of people, okay? And these computers, thanks to Turing, were universal. And this means that they could also click, okay? And everybody started clicking immediately. And the internet became a reality within a day. So this is really what the universality gets for you. In any event, so Turing, it took one war and a few years later, but 10 years after Turing, and Turing himself also did that, but John von Neumann usually takes credit for implementing the Turing's ideas into actual device and getting essentially what is now considered the first computer. So it's probably a couple of you have a laptop here. This computer is probably 1,000,000 times more expensive and 1,000,000 times slower than your laptop. Okay, what is so this, as it is, I think it's a fascinating intellectual story. But what makes it really unique, my favorite story of all, is the human tragedy, the sort of the human aspect of the story, which is sort of amazing. Out of all these people, and I'm also adding Emil Post, who is a genius. He lived in New York. He taught high school most of his life in New York, and he had early versions of Gödel's theorem and Turing's theorem, but out of pathological insecurity, he kept them in his drawer. Okay, when Turing and Gödel published the results, he became the greatest fan. So he was also extremely modest. So this man was manic depressive and actually died the second most tragic death of the bunch. He was electrocuted by his doctor because sort of, you know, that was the therapy back then. Then Gödel on the right, who has been called the greatest logician since Aristotle, died at Princeton in his 70s of malnutrition because he was refusing food out of paranoia that he was being poisoned. Then Cantor on the upper right, he was in and out of mental clinics. He died in a mental clinic. Out of deep melancholia. He was delusional. He was for the later half of his life, he was working on proving that Jesus was the son of Joseph of Arimathea, and that the plays of Shakespeare were written by Francis Bacon. Then even sort of paragons of sanity, you know. So I told you about Wittgenstein. You know, I don't think he was ever diagnosed, you know, anything, but he was really eccentric. Once Russell remembers that he was awakened by Wittgenstein at 3 a.m. To dilute a fine philosophical point, and Russell told him, "Listen, man, stop being so intense. You are going to go crazy." And Wittgenstein left his room, slammed the door, shouting, "God save me from sanity." And Russell adds in his notes, "I murmured to myself, God certainly will." Yeah. But even such paragons of sanity as Hilbert and Russell, Hilbert had a schizophrenic son who was put in the hospital, and immediately after that, when asked about his son, Hilbert said, "I no longer have a son," which, if you think about it, it's completely sane. Yeah, so. Russell lived with fear of madness all his life. That's all, you know, he's our narrator, he's our hero. I mean, so many say that, you know, many characterize the book as a biography of Russell, but it's certainly not that. I mean, I'll tell you what it is. I mean, Russell is just the narrator, okay? It's the book tells this story, but of course Russell gets a bigger part because he's a narrator. I mean, the framing narrative is, the framing story is that Russell is giving a talk at an unnamed university in the United States in the eve of the Second World War, and asked to ponder the question, should the United States be involved in the Second World War against Hitler? He tells the protesters, the peace protesters, listen, let's first speak about logic, and maybe it will help us reach a decision. So you know, the whole book essentially is a telling of this, is a retelling of this lecture. And Frege, you know, he certainly was. I don't believe he was insane in any way. I mean, as I told you, that he survived, his reputation survived very, very well the flaw in his method, you know, because of his gracious admission of the mistake. But his reputation did not survive the other flaw in his character. He sort of, you know, towards the end of his life, he wrote rabid anti-Semitic treatises. All right, so that's the story of these people. But I think nothing compares to the tragedy of this man. I mean, he did, you know, there was, you know, his life ended not by his madness, but the madness of his environment, of the madness, so, you know, how do you call it? I mean, the criminal bigotry of the legislation in England. He was in 1952. He was condemned of self-admitted homosexuality, and he was condemned by the court as an alternative to the prison sentence to hormonal treatment, which changed his body and mind. And as a result, he was sort of led to his suicide 2 years later. You might have read that 3 years ago, the Prime Minister of England apologized. You know, sorry, Alan Boy, you should have done that. Okay, so, sort of 57 years later. So that's the story we tell in Logicomix. I mean, so this is Russell in the age in his 30s. As I told you, it's not a Russell biography. Certainly, it's intent is not to teach you logic. I mean, several readers have written to me telling me, Professor, I reading this book, I learned things that I thought I never thought that I would learn about. And I'm delighted, but this is really an intended consequence. Okay, that's not what we wrote. I didn't write this book to teach anybody. Okay, frankly, there is too much education in my life. Okay, I mean, I've been in universities for 40 years. All right, so this is not intended to teach anybody anything. I mean, listen, we are telling a gripping story. Okay, and the point is that I mean, if it was a love story, okay, sort of a story of erotic obsession, sort of you would have described the hero's lover, okay, sort of in great detail, right? I mean, otherwise, sort of the reader is left hanging, okay. So, in this case, you have to describe a little bit what logic is all about, okay. And that's all. That's really minimally what we do, okay. So it's not, if you're planning to learn logic, okay, that's not the play, There are very nice books, okay, but so let me tell you, let me show you a few. So this is the massive trauma that was Russell's childhood. Okay, he was orphaned. He had lost mother, father, and beloved older sister by the age of 4. He lost his the next parental figure, his grandfather, was a former Prime Minister of England in the age of 6. And he grew up in the hands of a tyrannical grandmother. The only ray of light in this bleak childhood was his encounter with the certainty of mathematics. Okay, so you see him here, so understand, for the first time encountering Euclid. Okay. Euclid's theorems. Okay, so you see he says magic. So you probably know that our publisher is Bloomsbury, and these are the same publishers who published Harry Potter. Okay, so when they were preparing it, we did have dreams of Harry Potterdom. Okay, because after all, our story is also about an English orphan boy who at early adolescence encounters magic. Okay, but magic here, of course, is the magic of certainty, that the magical promise of certainty that lies in mathematics. Then he goes on to college and he flirts with his future wife, first of many wives, but also does serious work in white tie. Then he takes trips in Germany to meet Frege. Incidentally, these trips were never made. We invented them. Okay, so it's funny. 9 days ago, this last Monday at Berkeley, there was an event in which there was around a discussion of Logicomix, and I was, a couple of professors at Berkeley, including me, and a colleague of mine, Paolo Mancosu, gave a very nice presentation, of astounding scholarship about this subject, and he pointed out the many flaws, the many historical, we admit them all. So he probably didn't read carefully that we invented several things. And I had to tell him, thanks a lot. So that's a brilliant scholarship, but this is a made-up story, okay? Get it? A made-up story. So the only purpose, it's not to tell any story with any truthfulness, okay? There are many, there are 2 biographies of Russell, of which one is autobiography, a brilliant autobiography. I was warned not to read it before writing about Russell because the man writes like the devil, and sort of, he can make you believe anything he wants, okay? So that's, he has the Nobel Prize in Literature, Russell, by the way. Yeah. So, but sort of, the only purpose why you write a made-up story, frankly, is to grip the imagination of the reader, okay? To sort of, to haunt his or her dream life, okay? That's really your purpose, okay? Not to teach anything or to tell the truth, okay? So, this is an unusually fascinating and perplexing and dark and atmospheric story, okay? So, we didn't have to twist much, but if there was any conflict between fascinating story and the truth, of course we lied through our teeth, okay? So this is, he's in Paris attending Hilbert's historical speech 1900. He decides to write the Principia Mathematica with Alfred Whitehead. He also flirts with his wife, Whitehead's wife. Incidentally, the select few of you who I read my first novel, Turing, may be wondering if there is a lot of sex in Logicomix. Okay, so sadly, the only explicit sex scene that I could get past my Puritan co-authors is right there on the right, on the lower right, and it involves 2 animals. So 2 insects. Okay, so he keeps on flirting with Whitehead's wife. Then Wittgenstein comes in. Wittgenstein goes to war, and he has his main insight during the most dangerous of his missions. The meaning of the world does not reside in this world. Wittgenstein snowing Russell with his new theory of language. Yes. That's Gödel announcing his result. And all this is happening, of course, during the rise of Nazism. As I told you, there is a framing narrative by Russell himself giving this talk in 1939. And there is a second order framing story, which is basically we are characters here, okay, and this is my co-author with the blue shirt, and then we have the sketcher. So the art, as you can see, is not to be believed. So you may have any poems you want with dialogue and plot. So but the art, I think, is incredible. Believe me, it's toned down. Okay, these people can do. I need another colorist and Alekos Papadatos with a red shirt. The sketcher. They can do miracles. They can sort of, they could make a page so vibrant that nobody would ever read a balloon. Okay, so we tell them, take it easy, guys. Okay, so yeah, please tone it down a little. Yeah. So incidentally, there is several times, or we had quarrels with apostles of the following kind. No way, man. That's the line. My character is not going to say this. Okay, so but. We both lost a few of these battles, okay? So, so what I'm saying, I guess, is don't believe anything you read, okay? So, everything you read. So, there is a stroll in the darker part of modern Athens. This takes place in Athens, and it ends where all books should end, which is at an ancient Greek theater at the performance of the Oresteia. Incidentally, so I'm going to open it for questions from the audience, but I want to relieve you from the burden of asking the question that everybody has asked, okay, which is what were you smoking the day that we decided to write this as a comics, okay, as a comic book? So I know I had this, you know, it was Apostolos' idea. I was not a comics fan back then, so you know, I had only read Mouse, and when I heard his idea, I laughed, and then I cried, okay. But soon, really, so you know, I got to like it. I mean, especially after I met the artists and saw their work, and so I mean, you know, if you think about it, there is a lot of logic, and forgive the pun. I mean, you know, there is a lot of logic into this decision. You know, so try to understand, you know, our position. I mean, you know, we're writing a historical novel. Okay, if you think about it, a historical novel. So you know, it's not my favorite genre, but I've read a few. In a historical novel, a great amount of novelistic energy goes into capturing the texture of the period, so you know, the atmosphere of the era, you know, and this takes a lot of energy, okay, and leaves much less for character and plot. Okay, so in a graphic novel, you don't have to do it, right? I mean, it's right there on the page. So you know, so I think that it is that graphic novel is an optimal form for this kind of thing, for a historical novel. So one last note, this last summer I renovated my my house, my parental house in Athens, and I found in the process a few boxes of notebooks from essentially from elementary school up to college, which my mother had obsessively preserved, and it was like a treasure. So you know, I spent a week going through that, and to my great surprise, in two of these notebooks, or you know, which were the unused half of high school notebooks, I saw that I had written 2 graphic novels when I was a teenager. Okay, so you know, so there were. You can't describe them fairly in any other way. They were sort of a couple of dozen pages. There were frames, there were stick figures, and there were balloons. Okay, so you know, there was plot, and there was character, and there was sort of, you know, there were teenage fantasies, sort of, you know, but still, sort of, you know, to my great surprise, I discovered that I was not exactly as much of a newcomer to graphic novels as I thought I was. Okay, so thank you very much. Yes.
It's funny that your book and the Harry Potter book are both published by Bloomsbury, but I think you should have called it Bertrand Russell and the Philosopher's Stone. And you might have come close. My more serious question is, you know, I know that in your professional career you've obviously been inspired by the ideas of all of these people, but writing the book, did you grow to like them personally? What was your feeling? I mean, imagine that you had to live with them or be with them. You know, that's different than reading their papers. What did you think of these various characters that you've tried to come to grips with them personally?
So I'll tell you. We, you know, I did mention that. I mean, we have been working on this book for 8 years. Okay, so we started. You know, we met with Apostolos 8 years ago, and on our first lunch together, we started talking about this book. Okay, so. And a couple of months later, we decided on the comic book format. The reason I wanted to write something about this story is because I knew I knew how fascinating and consequential it is, but also I was aware that it had a lot of trauma, a lot of human tragedy, and you know, I had never suspected how thorough and painful it was. Okay, and so I mean, you know, there is nobody involved here. I mean, and of course there is the dark, painful history of Europe in the first half of the 20th century, but beyond that, I mean, these were incredibly tormented people. Okay, so either by serious mental problems, or by fear of mental problems, or by sort of obsession that goes beyond the normal and ordinary. So I was really surprised. I mean, I did not know. I did not know this. So what are the emotions? It's astonishment and sympathy. Yeah. So that comes to mind.
So Christos, you actually clarified what the book is not. You said it's not an educational book. You also said it's not always the truth.
Right.
So then what it is? What is kind of, now looking back, what do you think that you wrote here?
I don't know how to say that. It's a novel. It's a novel. It's a story we thought up, based, of course, on I mean, you have to respect the historical reality for practical reasons. I mean, if we had Austria win the First World War, okay, people, a reader would drop the book. You know what I'm saying? So you can't do things like that. Okay, but so you have to respect to some extent what happened. All right, but other than that, it's and I said, fortunately, I feel very lucky that the story itself, the true story, is so incredibly sort of gripping that we didn't have to twist much. We invented a couple of encounters that never happened. So I mean, maybe we made Frege a little more crazy than he was. but in compensation, we had him live 8 more years. So that's. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
This is a follow-up in a way to the first question. So of these people, the only one I really know well is Russell, who I think was sane, although very unhappy in many ways. And in fact, he describes in some places his work in mathematics and some of it in philosophy as a kind of escape from the world, and it gave him a certain solace. And I wonder whether that was true for the other people, or what kinds of motivations, personal motivations
This you can only, Russell is very, very self-conscious and explicit and autobiographical. Most of these other people, so Gödel had left a lot of his memoirs in very nice discussions with Hao Wang, during the 60s. But most of these people did not write much about their motivation. But you can only guess, okay, that why were these people the most fervent champions of the cause of solid foundations for mathematics, okay? You can probably suspect that one of the reasons is that they were in desperate need of solid foundations for something. That's speculation.
It'll sound like griping, but you left out my favorite character.
Who's your
Alonzo Church. Gödel went to Princeton. Before Turing worked on his machine, Gödel and Church worked through Gödel's language, basically first a functional programming in a finite domain. Came up with the same encoding, same idea, same insights. 5 years ahead of him.
Okay, so
why you leave him out?
So no. You're telling the truth. Okay, so what happened is that, as I said, after Gödel's theorem, there was this little hope remaining, automating all proofs of all theorems that do have proofs, and I don't think anybody, everybody after the shock of Gödel's negative result was sure that this was not possible. Okay, and as a result, there were several people. Gödel indeed visited Princeton in 1934 and gave lectures on recursive functions in Church's class, and the note taker was somebody called Stephen Kline. So there was, and then Post was scribbling things in the early 30s in his crowded apartment in New York City. So there were at least 4 people, okay, let's count them. Church, perhaps Gödel himself sort of added to the soup a lot, but Church, let's say, Post, Kline, and Turing, okay, who basically what these 4 people did is they came up with a formalism of what a machine can be, okay? So, these were 4 completely independent formalisms, okay? So, and you are right to say that Church's formalism was, and sort of proof of the Entscheidungsproblem, which was a few months before Turing, and in fact, Turing wanted to withdraw his paper when he found about Church, but Church read Turing's paper, and then there was sort of some kind of inconsequential error discovered in Church's paper. So that's why that's how the 2 papers were both published. And then Kline later had another motivation. So in some sense, that was in the mid-30s when there was no actual computer. Of course, the computer was 10 years away. Here you have 4 great thinkers, 4 brilliant mathematicians. Let's say take a shot in the dark, okay? So imagine sort of 4 people throwing a dart in a dark room, okay? And then here is the magical thing that happened. They turned on the light, and they noticed that the dart had gone to the precise spot, the precise same spot, okay? That 4 darts hit the same spot exactly, okay? In other words, they proved exposed that these 4 formalisms are completely equivalent. They basically define the same thing. And when this happens, okay, you are excused to suspect that there is some significance to that spot in the wall, okay? So that there is something good going on there, okay? And that was computation, okay? And as I said, 10 years later, computation was realized. However, I will sort of insist that Turing's formalism has been by far the most influential in computation, in the sense that it was how should I say? It was more graphic, more alive. Okay, so
kind of like these novels.
Sorry? yeah, I guess so. I'm for graphic stuff, I guess. Yeah.
So how far has mathematics come then in the past 50 or so years? Because you kind of make it sound like all these guys were like these big people. Are there any recent mathematicians?
Okay. So you remind me. So a friend who is a mathematician working at IBM was going to England, and he was stopped at the customs, and he was asked, what do you do? I'm a mathematician. Who do you work for? IBM. So immediately the customs guy realized that he has something, he's up to something. So he said, how come you are IBM, which is a computer company, and you are a mathematician? So this guy probably is full of computers, full of chips. So he said, no. So what do you do in your? Well, I prove theorems. Do you teach? No. What do you mean prove theorems? No. So he told him, listen, do you know Euclid? He said, yeah, of course I know Euclid. So, okay, so Euclid didn't prove everything, So what I'm doing all day is I'm trying to find little holes in what Euclid proved and fill them. I prove them myself, okay? So the person was here and impressed, said, wow, that's really fantastic. We don't have blokes like that in England, I don't think. So yes, there are great mathematicians. So these were, these were the people who sort of sacrificed themselves. They worked on the question of foundation of mathematics, so that mathematicians can do sort of their work later, in relative peace of mind. Okay, so in some sense, Gödel's theorem shows the following: that ingenuity is needed in order to prove theorems. Okay, you cannot mechanize them. You cannot mechanize this proof. So, and ingenuity has been used over the past 70 years after Gödel. Okay, so that in a great degree, mathematics has progressed more rapidly in the late 20th century than any other period. Yeah, so yes, I mean,
But
sorry. Yeah.
shouldn't you admit that real mathematicians wouldn't even care about this?
There is a yeah, you know, so precisely.
Just
I mean,
in case
so,
I'm not in the room.
yeah.
Right?
So working mathematicians immediately after Gödel. Okay, I mean, the reaction was,
Who cares?
okay, that's interesting, but what does it have to do with me? I mean, I'm not going to. So Gödel proved that one particular theorem has no proof. Okay, but mathematicians looked at his theorem, the theorem that has no proof, and said, yeah, yuck. You know, I would never try to prove a theorem like that. so you know, the theorems I prove are much more beautiful and much more meaningful. Okay, so that was the reaction of mathematicians, and it still is. I mean, in some sense, Gödel's theorem, you know, was a good news for mathematicians, gave eternal job security to them. Yeah.
Okay, 8 years ago. In the last 8 years, there have been many wars and some interesting decisions made. Was that in your mind when you were writing the book? Do you see a role for logic in going to war?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, so it was. Of course, Russell's call for people to first learn about logic and then discuss war was in some sense frivolous. I mean, it didn't lead much. I mean, so it gave them a very nice creation tale. So but nothing solid to grip on. Okay, the war. Okay. Yes, I mean, so we started writing it essentially in the eve of the Afghanistan war. Okay, so we started thinking about it, and I mean, I think that we wrote the first version of the sketch of this framing tale, the sort of the U.S. University talk, right in the beginning of the Afghanistan war. Yeah. So yes, I mean, obviously it was in our minds. There is a question there, back.
You mentioned earlier about the decision machine, like a machine that would make decisions for us. And there's a book that recently came out called The Predictioneer's Game. I'm not sure if you read it.
Sorry.
It's by Bruce Buenos de Mesquita, and he basically came up with a logical computer program where if you put in variables, it will tell you the likely outcomes of situations. And he's applied it to a lot of different situations, including the war in Iraq, and a whole bunch of other things. So I was wondering, I was just curious if you'd heard of it.
No. Yeah. So I've not heard of it. So there is since Leibniz's time, and perhaps because of Leibniz's dream, and because Leibniz was the optimist who came up with this dream, we have had a lot of progress into creating systems that would manipulate variables that will give us sort of solid decisions based on rigorous analysis. You know, frankly, the problem lies in two things: that we have no good ways of corresponding our variables to the world, and we have no good ways of choosing our variables. So it's for right. So for limited domains in all kinds of sandboxes, you can do miracles.
But even there, you make a decision first, then you ask the mathematician to come and you come up with a program or that justifies the decision.
Right. Then you hire a consultant to support the decision. Right. Yes.
So did you really get lost? You said you fictionalized some things and you didn't fictionalize others. Did you really get lost in the streets of Athens? Or?
No. You know, so you know, we had numerous drafts of this plot, but for some reason this survived. You know, all the rewritings. I mean, and sort of, you know, it's yeah, no, this never happened. Yeah, so, yeah.